Montana Territory, July 1887. The sun hung high and pitiless, its heat pressing down like judgment as Florence Dilley collapsed along the dusty road. Pain carved its way through her spine, sharp and deep like a hot knife twisting with every breath. She had walked nearly 5 miles since the wagon left her behind, declared too old, too pregnant, and too much of a burden to carry any farther. Her palms were scraped raw from falling on the gravel, and her belly, swollen and tight, strained against the thin fabric of her faded cotton dress. She hadn't cried when her brother's wife shouted that she was useless. She hadn't cried when the wagon rolled away, creaking toward Helena with the 2 children Florence had raised as her own ever since her sister died. But now, alone beneath the weight of the sky, with nothing around her but her ragged breath and the soft groan of wind over the road, Florence curled her arms around her belly and let the tears come. She was 39. She had nothing, and unless God or something kinder intervened, she was going to die here on the road. Her blood baking into the dust. Then, through the dry silence, came the slow, rhythmic beat of hooves. She squinted against the sun, blinking as she struggled to sit up, her limbs trembling too much to lift her weight. The rider emerged from the shimmer of heat, tall in the saddle, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat, a rifle strapped across his back, and a trail-worn weariness clinging to his shoulders. He said nothing at first, just brought his horse to a stop beside her. She opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was a hoarse rasp. He dismounted with ease and moved toward her. "Don't move," he said gently, kneeling beside her. His voice was deep and calm, the kind of sound that made a person think of creeks in spring. "You're going to be fine." She let out a cracked, humorless laugh. "That's hard to believe." He reached for her hand, not rushed, not careless. His fingers were rough but steady, warm with the kind of strength that didn't flinch. "You're not dying today," he said. "What's your name, Florence?" she whispered. "Florence Dilley." "I'm Wade Merrick," the cowboy said. "Can you stand if I help you?" "I don't know," she breathed. I'm 8 months along." His eyes softened as they drifted to her belly. "All right, Florence, I'm going to lift you. Easy now." It had been years since anyone had held her, not since her husband died in a mining collapse, buried beneath the earth with every ounce of love she had left. But when Wade slid one arm beneath her legs and the other round her back, lifting her like she was nothing more than a sack of flour, she let her head fall against his chest. He smelled of horse, leather, and cedar smoke like trail dust and steady ground. He carried her to his mare and helped her up with a tenderness she didn't expect from a stranger, then mounted behind her. Her ribs ached, her head spun, but she leaned back into him, letting herself be held. They rode without speaking, the horse's gait steady beneath them, the trail winding through sunburned grassland. He didn't ask questions. He just kept one arm wrapped around her, firm and unshakable. After a while, she asked, "Where are we going?" "My cabin's 2 miles that way," he said, nodding west toward Elkhorn Creek. "You'll rest there. I've got food, cool water, and a bed. You don't even know me. I know you're hurt alone and shouldn't be out in this sun," Wade said. "That's enough." She was too tired to argue. Her eyes drifted shut, surrendering to the rhythm of the ride. When she woke again, he was lifting her down in front of a small log cabin nestled among a quiet grove of pine trees. There was a vegetable garden out front and wildflowers spilled, like spilled paint along the edges. A dog barked once from the porch and went silent with a look from Wade. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee. It was clean, sparse, but warm. A wide bed sat in the corner, and a wash basin caught the light from a nearby window. Wade helped her settle on the edge of the bed and brought her a tin cup filled with cool water. Her hands trembled as she drank. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a single nod. "You sleep. I'll be right here." She tried to protest, to say she couldn't impose, but her body overruled her. She drifted off. When she woke, the scent of beans and cornbread filled the cabin. She shifted upright, her back stiff but no longer burning. A blanket had been draped over her legs. Wade sat across the room by the fire, turning something in his hands. He looked up as she stirred. "You should eat," he said, rising and bringing her a plate. She took it, her stomach snarling awake. How long was I out? 3 hours. You needed it. She ate in silence, watching him through the steam rising from her plate. He had a strong jaw, and eyes like dust dark, watchful. He moved like someone who'd spent a long time without company, careful with his steps and words. Why did you help me? She asked finally. He met her gaze, because someone should have. The words sliced through her, not cruel, but deep. She set the plate aside and looked toward the floor. My brother's wife said I was too old to have a baby, that I was holding them back. They took the wagon. They took the children. I raised them since they were born. Their mama, my sister, died 5 years ago. They're all I had left. Wade's hands clenched on his knees, a flicker of anger behind his stillness. I wasn't ready to be alone again, she whispered. You're not alone now, he said. She looked up. His expression didn't change, but there was something fierce and quiet in the way he looked at her, as if she mattered, as if he had already decided it. The fire crackled softly between them. Why are you out here alone? She asked. My brother died in the war, Wade said. My father drank himself into the ground. I came west to forget what I couldn't fix. You never married? No, never found someone I wanted to build something with. Her hand drifted to her belly. You don't have to stay, she said. I just needed a place to rest. I'll go come morning. He stood in a smooth motion, crossed the room into strides, and knelt in front of her. His hand found hers again. You're not going anywhere, he said, steady as stone. Not until you're safe, not until that baby is born. And if you want to stay after that, you stay. Her throat tightened. You don't even know me, I know. Enough, Wade said. You're strong. You didn't give up. And I know what it feels like to be left behind. She stared at him, heart pounding. No one had looked at her like that in years, like she was worth something. Like she was still a woman, not just a burden. She ran her fingers over the back of his hand. You're kind, Wade Merrick. He smiled then, the first she'd seen from him, small, sure, and real. You're not too old, Florence Dilly. You're exactly right. A laugh broke from her, soft and wet as tears traced down her cheeks again. You're going to make me cry all over. Then let it be for something good, he said. She nodded, squeezing his hand, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid. The day drifted by like a gentle stream. Florence sat near the window in a worn rocking chair, a blanket over her lap and a bowl of sliced apples resting in her hands. Outside, the sun dipped low behind the ridgeline, casting long blue shadows through the pines. Crickets began their slow, steady chorus, and the air smelled faintly of sap and warm bark. Wade had been splitting kindling out back, the clean rhythm of axe against wood steady as breath. When he came in, he didn't speak right away. He brushed sawdust from his sleeves, hung his head on the peg by the door, and poured water from the kettle into the basin. She listened to the scrape of his boots on the floorboards, the quiet order in his movements. You want me to heat water for washing? He asked, glancing toward her. She nodded, setting the apples aside. That would be kind of you. He brought the pot to the hearth and stirred the coals until they flared back to life. She watched how the light danced along his cheekbone. There were small things she hadn't noticed before: how he held his breath just before lifting something, how he kept his tools in neat rows near the door. Not fussy, just careful. I could help with the garden tomorrow, she said after a moment, her voice low. He didn't look up from the fire. You don't owe me anything, Florence. I didn't say I did, she replied, brushing a hand over her belly. But I'd like to feel useful again. He nodded once. There's onions need tending. Fence rail gave out last week. I've mended rails before, she said, lifting her chin. I don't doubt it. She smiled, then leaned back in the chair. The baby shifted inside her, slow and firm. It was strange to feel that kind of life still stirring inside her when so much else had fallen away. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the room's warmth sink into her bones. You got someone to send word to? Wade asked. Anyone hood. Want to know where you are? Her eyes opened slowly. No, not anymore. He didn't press her. When the water was hot, he brought a clean cloth and helped her to the basin. He turned his back as she washed, close enough to reach if she needed him, but far enough to give her privacy. She appreciated that kind of respect. Most folks forgot to offer it once you looked worn down enough. As she dried her face and hands, she noticed his fingers resting on a slip of faded paper tacked to the wall beside the shelf. His expression had shifted, still distant. "Who was that from?" she asked softly. "My mother," he said. "She wrote it before she passed. I keep it there to remember what mattered to her." Florence didn't ask what it said. Some things weren't meant to be shared. Instead, she reached for a shawl draped over the back of the chair and folded it across her shoulders. "I'd like to help cook supper," she said. "If you've got dried beans, I can make a skillet mash with salt pork." Wade's mouth twitched in a quiet smile. "You cook often?" "When I've got something to cook with." He went to the cupboard and handed her a sack of beans. "Then I'll take your word for it." They worked in quiet rhythm, her at the stove, him chopping more wood for morning. The cabin filled with the scent of browning meat and warm cornmeal, the kind of smell that threads into your bones and stays there. When the food was ready, they ate by the window, watching dusk steal across the clearing. She noticed how slowly he chewed, how he seemed to taste every bite like it was rare, like he wasn't used to sharing meals with anyone but his own silence. "This is good," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I used to cook for 6 back when my sister was alive. You learn to stretch things, make do." "I'd say you did more than make do." They sat a while longer, neither reaching for seconds. The stillness between them was soft and full, like something healing slowly in the quiet. Outside, the sky had deepened to a rich indigo, the fading light softening the edges of the world. Fireflies blinked like tiny lanterns near the shadowed edge of the trees, their glow pulsing gently in the cooling air. Florence watched them for a moment before breaking the quiet. "Where did you learn to keep house like this?" she asked softly. Wade's gaze lifted from the worn floorboards, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "My ma taught me before I left Missouri," he said. "A man ought to know how to tend to things, not just break them." Florence nodded slowly, feeling the truth in his words. "She taught you right." Wade leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting toward the window, catching the last flickers of twilight. "You ever think about what comes after?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then answered, "I used to, before everything got so tangled. Now, I just think about getting through the day." He turned his gaze back to her, steady and sure. "You don't have to just get through anymore." A long silence stretched between them. She didn't respond, but somewhere deep in her chest, a small weight lifted, not quite hope, not yet, but the faintest whisper of possibility. Later, after the fire had burned low and the coals glowed a soft red beneath the grate, Wade rose and pulled a thick blanket from the trunk. He laid it carefully across the bed where Florence rested. Her hand, resting protectively on her belly, twitched slightly as if she had felt the movement even in sleep. He stood quietly for a moment, watching her with something like reverence in his eyes. Then he turned down the lamp and settled by the hearth, where a second blanket and pillow had been spread earlier. Outside, the night deepened. The wind stirred the pines with a soft susurrus, but inside the cabin, all was still and safe. By the second morning, the cabin had wrapped around Florence like a well-worn coat, foreign at first, but slowly warm and comforting. She awoke to the gentle sound of water pouring from a tin pail and the rich scent of boiled oats, thickened with lard. Her ankles protested as she shifted upright, but the ache was dull now, a slow, steady pull reminding her of the burden her body still carried. Stepping outside, she found Wade crouched by the garden, pulling stubborn weeds from between the rows. The dog, lean and quiet with age, lay beside him, its tail thumping softly. Once upon noticing her, "You sleep through the thunder last night?" Wade asked without looking up. "I did," she replied. Surprised, "Didn't think I would, but I did." It didn't roll into loud, just enough to shake the roof a little. She descended the porch steps carefully, one hand gripping the railing. "I could use something to do with my hands." Wade tilted his head toward the fence along the far side of the clearing. "Post near the corner cracked, needs a fresh one cut, needs bracing." She followed his gaze. "I can hold it in place while you set it." He dusted his knees and stood, brushing his palms together. "All right." They worked without hurry, each movement deliberate. She steadied the post as he drove it down with measured strikes of the mallet. The sun warmed the back of her neck, and the scent of wet earth rose freshly from the soil. After a pause to catch their breath, she ventured, "You ever think about going back east?" Wade leaned on the Malay's handle, eyes narrowing against the bright sky. "No place left there for me." She watched a hawkwill high overhead, its shadow flickering across the ground like a silent promise. "There's a woman in Helena who used to keep chickens took in folks sometimes when they had nowhere else. I thought about going there before I ended up on that road." "You still want to?" "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I don't want to be alone in a strange house again." He nodded slowly, then met her gaze with quiet resolve. "You won't be. Not if you don't want to." She held his eyes without looking away. "You mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean." They held each other's gaze a moment longer until the hawk cried out once from above, breaking the spell. Back inside, she settled near the hearth while Wade pulled dried herbs from a rack above the stove and began steeping them in a tin pot. She watched his fingers move with practiced ease, not hurried, but sure. "What's in that?" she asked. "Yarrow and red raspberry leaf for strength." "Who taught you that?" "There was a woman in Virginia who helped my brother's wife through a hard birth." I remembered the mix. "You remember a lot." He poured the tea into a mug and handed it to her. "I try." She took a slow sip, warmth spreading in her chest. "I used to keep a ledger," she said softly. "Not just for accounts, recipes, birthdays when the rains came late. I like knowing what came before." "You still have it?" "No," she said, voice heavy, "left behind." Like everything else, he sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. "You'll write a new one." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I will, later that afternoon." Heavy clouds rolled in low and gray. Wade moved firewood undercover while she helped string oilcloth across the porch railings, sealing gaps to keep the rain from seeping in. They worked side by side, their quiet presence filling the space, not silence, but the easy comfort of shared labor. When the rain came, it fell in thick sheets, drumming hard on the roof and sliding down the windows in long, steady rivulets. Wade stoked a fire and laid out dry clothes for her while she changed behind a curtain he'd strung in the corner. She emerged wearing one of his shirts to broaden the shoulders, but soft from years of wear, and her own skirt, now dry beside the hearth. He didn't look her way as she stepped out, but his voice held something different when he offered her a seat by the fire. "You warm enough?" "I am," she answered, settling down and folding her hands in her lap. Her fingers traced restless circles over one another. "Did you want children?" she asked, eyes flickering to the flames. "I did," he said quietly, "but I always thought it would come later." Then later kept moving. She nodded once. "You?" He returned the question. "I wanted them before I knew what it would cost." She sighed softly. "Then I had my sisters to raise. That was enough for a while." Her hand moved slowly to rest on her stomach. "I didn't want to do this alone." "You aren't." She turned her head toward him, searching his face. "You keep saying that. I'll keep saying it until you believe it." She studied him in the firelight, his long frame now relaxed, eyes reflecting the low glow. She didn't answer at once, but when he reached over slowly, deliberately, and laid his hand over hers, she didn't pull away. "I don't know what happens next," she confessed. "We figure it out," he said simply, "one day at a time." Outside, the rain softened to a gentle patter. The dog stirred once and settled again. Florence leaned back in the chair, Wade's fingers still resting lightly over hers. They stayed like that, wrapped in the hush of the storm, steady and close. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe she might stay. The following morning, the air had turned crisp. A dry wind swept down from the hills, carrying the faint promise of August. Florence stood at the edge of the clearing, her hand resting on the porch rail as she watched Wade saddle his bay. He checked the cinch twice, eyes narrowed against the rising dust. "Where are you headed?" she asked, her voice low and thick with sleep. "Trading post out near Jacob's Fork," he replied. "We're short on flour, and I figured you might want something better than beans and cornmeal." She stepped down beside him, the hem of her skirt brushing the tops of her boots. "How far is it?" "Half a day there, half back if I don't dawdle." She nodded, watching as he adjusted the saddlebag straps. "You trust me here on my own?" He glanced at her with a wry smile. "You kept 2 children fed and clothed through worse, didn't you?" She tilted her head. "You're not worried I'll wander off, no?" he said. "I think you've stopped running." She blinked once, then turned her gaze toward the trees. "Pick me up a spool of thread if they've got it. Blue. If they do, it's been a long time since I stitched something for myself." He gave a short nod, mounted, and turned the mare toward the trail. She watched until he disappeared into the trees, the sound of hooves fading behind the whisper of the wind. Back inside, the cabin felt different, not empty exactly, but paused, like it had drawn a deep breath and was waiting. She swept the floor, wiped down the basin, and sorted through the basket of root vegetables by the door. Midday came and passed in quiet procession. She boiled water for washing and mended the hem of her skirt, though her stitches were slower than she remembered. Her fingers had stiffened with time. By late afternoon, she sat near the garden, the dog resting faithfully beside her, when a sharp pain clenched low in her belly. She froze, pressing one hand to the fabric, breath catching. The pain passed quickly, but left her shaken. She shifted carefully, watching the sky deepen to burnished gold. The second pain came as she folded laundry over the porch railing, sharper this time. Lingering longer, she gripped the railing tightly, until it eased, jaw clenched in quiet determination. Then she straightened, gathering the clothes with care and carrying them inside. Wade returned just as dusk spilled a soft shadow over the pines. His shirt streaked with dust, the mare tethered and breathing heavily from the ride. He tied her off quickly and hurried inside, his eyes immediately finding Florence as she braced herself against the table. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice taut with concern. She exhaled slowly through her nose. "They've started." He crossed the room into quick strides, setting the bundle he carried aside. "How long?" The first contraction came nearly an hour ago, Florence said, her voice tight and measured. They weren't close yet, but they were real. Wade nodded, already moving with quiet resolve. "I'll heat some water. You sit down. Let me get things ready." She wanted to protest, to insist. She didn't need fussing over, but exhaustion won. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the edge of the bed. The old dog settled nearby, ears twitching in tune with the tense silence that filled the room. Wade moved with steady, purposeful calm, laying out clean cloths, tending the fire's dying embers, and setting the steaming mug of her herbal tea. Just within reach, his movements were deliberate, unhurried, and that steady rhythm grounded her like nothing else could have in that moment. She watched as he lit the second lamp, the warm glow casting dancing shadows across his cheek. "You ever done this before?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "No," he said quietly. "But I remember what the midwife said." She nodded, gripping the edge of the mattress just as another wave of pain rose and broke over her. When it passed, she leaned forward, breathing shallow and quick. "You shouldn't be doing this alone," he said, crouching beside her. "I'm not," she replied. "You're here." He reached for her hand, holding it gently without a word. The night stretched on long and slow. Wade stayed close, wiping the sweat that gathered on her temples, helping her drink when she could. The pains came harder, closer together now, and she bore them with clenched teeth and eyes fixed on the rough rafters overhead. Somewhere just before dawn, when the cabin was still but for the crackle of coals and the soft wind pressing against the shutters, their child entered the world, a small, red-faced girl, crying sharp and clear like a startled bird breaking from its nest. Wade wrapped her in a dry cloth and placed her tenderly into Florence's arms. She looked down at the tiny bundle, her chest rising and falling in trembling breaths. "She's got your mouth," Wade murmured softly. Florence smiled faintly, exhaustion lining her face. "She's got your quiet." He settled beside the bed, not touching, but close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him. "What will you call her?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers brushed the newborn's soft cheek. "June," she said at last. "For the month I thought I'd lose her, and didn't." He nodded, his throat working as he swallowed. The weight of those words. Florence turned to him, pale and rimmed with fatigue. But when she reached out, her grip was sure. "You stayed." I told you I would. I know, she said quietly, but people say a lot of things. I don't. She looked down at the sleeping infant nestled between them. I want you here not just for tonight, for all of it. He said nothing but reached out slow and steady, cupping her hand in his. When the sun crept over the ridge and spilled soft gold across the floorboards, Wade returned with a basin of warm water. He sat beside her as she washed the baby's tiny hands. The room was thick with the scent of wood smoke and new life. When Florence leaned her head against his shoulder, he shifted to hold her closer, his arm curling gently around her back. They didn't speak again that morning. They didn't need to dot by the third week. Florence had taken to rising before dawn, before the light fully settled across the clearing. The air was thick with the scent of sun-warmed pine and damp earth. The small cabin stood quiet beneath the hush of early morning. Baby June slept swaddled in a basket Wade had carved from split willow, a thin shawl tucked gently around her shoulders. Florence moved slowly, the deliberate pace of a woman healing from both the weight of carrying and the ache of beginning anew. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove, reaching for the bread she'd started the night before. Her hands, though worn, moved now with steady purpose. Wade came in from the lean-to a little while later, his coat dusted with the morning's work. He leaned against the doorframe for a moment, watching her with a quiet tenderness. His damp curls at the nape of his neck caught the light. I thought I'd build a cradle, he said softly. Something better than the basket, if you'd want it. She didn't look up at once. Will you show me how? He stepped forward and nodded. I'd like that. By midday, they were out behind the cabin, shaded beneath the tall spruce. Wade had brought his tools and a few planks of pine he'd milled last season. He showed her how to mark the curves for the rockers, guiding her hand as she traced the lines with the awl. She leaned into him slightly as she worked, and he didn't move away. Did you build all this? She asked, glancing toward the cabin. Every inch, he said quietly. Took me to Winters. I didn't know what I was building it for until you came. Florence held still, breath catching in her throat. Then she leaned closer, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. Later, as the cradle began to take shape, June stirred softly inside the basket. Letting out a low squall, Florence wiped her hands and went to her, lifting the baby carefully and settling into the rocking chair. Wade stood nearby, watching as she hummed a low tune, wordless but tender. Tell me about your sister, he said quietly. Florence adjusted June's wrap and began. She was younger than me by 4 years, wild at heart. She used to climb the sycamores in her petticoats and come down with her hair full of leaves. Sounds like she gave you trouble. She gave me joy, Florence said softly, even when she left me with 2 little ones and a heart I didn't know how to carry. Wade crouched beside the chair. You carried it, not alone, she said, meeting his eyes. That night, while June slept nearby, Florence sat by the fire, patching a tear in one of Wade's shirts. He was carving the last piece of the cradle, smoothing the headboard with a strip of hide stretched taut between his hands. You used to live with silence, she said softly. Do you miss it? He didn't answer at once. I never knew it was silence until it was gone. Now I know it was loneliness. She set the shirt aside. You don't have to be alone anymore. A long breath escaped him, like something long-held finally loosened. I know. He set the carving down and stood. She rose too, uncertain for a moment, until he took her hand and drew her close. His palm settled gently against her back. You don't owe me anything, he said. She reached up, touching the side of his face. And you've never asked for anything. That's why I love you. The words settled between them, quiet and sure. His hand curved around her waist, and he kissed her with the kind of care born from knowing loss. Her arms wrapped around his neck, holding him as if the ground beneath them had finally steadied. They didn't speak again until the fire had burned low. When Wade finally lifted her hand to his lips, his voice was low and earnest. Stay with me, marry me. She didn't hesitate. Yes, they were wed the following Sunday with only the wind and the trees to witness it. She wore a pale blue ribbon at her throat, the one he'd brought back from the post. He had carved her a ring from juniper, smooth and warm against her skin. When they exchanged vows on the porch, June nestled in Florence's arms, blinking up at the sky. Wade said little, simply taking her hands and holding her gaze as if it were the only thing that mattered. They built a life slowly. Florence tended the garden, taught Wade how to make lye soap from ash and fat, and sang softly when she thought no one was listening. Wade taught her how to read the clouds for weather, how to reset a snare, and how to listen for the difference between silence and stillness. They never spoke of the road she'd walk to reach him. They didn't need to. Her laughter filled the cabin now, her voice the last sound he heard each night. June grew strong and bright-eyed, her tiny fingers always reaching, always curious. She learned to walk on the pine-scented floorboards and spoke her first word on a fog-heavy morning, "Mama." Years passed, quiet and full. They had another child, a boy with Wade's calm eyes and Florence's strong will. They named him Samuel, after the spring rains that came the week he was born. Though the world beyond their clearing continued to change, inside that cabin love held steady like firelight at the heart of a storm. They grew older in each other's arms, tending the earth and one another with the same care they once gave to survival. Florence never walked another road alone, and Wade never spent another night in silence.